Choose wisely, Emily. Richard Hawthorne's voice echoed through the grand hall, sharp and commanding, each word slicing through the polished silence like a cold wind. The room shimmered under the afternoon sunlight streaming through the towering windows, bouncing off the crystal chandelier and reflecting in the marble floors, casting tiny rainbows that danced across the walls. Emily Hawthorne stood frozen in the middle of the room, her small hands clutching the hem of her pale pink dress, eyes wide as she looked from her father to the line of elegant models standing poised and perfect, each one a mirror of sophistication and grace, their smiles polished, their eyes glinting with quiet superiority. In the corner, almost invisible, Aaliyah Johnson straightened a tray she had been carrying, the scent of lavender polish and the faint tang of lemon cleaner clinging to her uniform, her dark skin catching a soft glint of the sunlight as she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, her gaze calm, measured, and unassuming. Richard's tall frame dominated the room, suit impeccably tailored, his crisp white shirt catching the light, each button a small reflection of authority, and yet the air seemed heavy with tension, a stillness that made the tick of the antique grandfather clock in the corner feel loud and intrusive. The models whispered among themselves, subtle glances and half-smiles, the soft shuffle of designer heels on marble floors punctuating their amusement, as if they could feel the power they held over a young girl standing uncertain and unsure of her choice. Emily's breathing was shallow, each inhale a quiet struggle against the invisible weight of expectation, her small fingers curling tightly around the fabric of her dress. She remembered the last time she had faced a decision in front of her father, how the words of correction had stung, how the cold appraisal had frozen her from the inside out, and now that same chill seemed to fill the room, pressing down, pushing against her chest. Aaliyah, though unnoticed by most, had been watching, eyes soft but attentive, noting the tiny tremble in Emily's hands, the way her gaze flitted nervously from one polished model to the next, and without a word, she adjusted the tray, set it down on a nearby side table, and stepped back, letting her presence be known in the quietest way possible. Richard's voice, smooth and controlled, sliced through the murmurs of the models. Emily, your choice will define the household. Remember, appearances matter. The words hung like glass shards in the air, sharp but cold, and for a heartbeat, even the sunlight seemed to dim, the colors of the room muted as if the marble itself was holding its breath. Emily's eyes darted again toward the line of models, each one a study in symmetry and elegance, but then her gaze shifted, almost imperceptibly, to Aaliyah, whose hands were clasped lightly in front of her, posture straight but relaxed, a subtle warmth in her presence that seemed to fill the edges of Emily's awareness. In that moment, the model's confident smiles faltered slightly, uncertainty flashing for just a second before being masked by training and expectation, while Richard's brow furrowed, sensing a shift he couldn't yet name, a quiet defiance in the air that he had not accounted for. Emily's small voice barely rose above a whisper, yet it cut through the tension like a bell. I choose her. The words, simple and clear, made the models blink in surprise, their polished composure momentarily shaken, and Richard froze mid-step, his pen hovering over the invitation he had been holding, eyes narrowing as he tried to reconcile the authority he commanded with the truth in the child's declaration. The room seemed to pause, the chandelier light reflecting in the silent eyes of everyone present, the polished floors capturing the stillness, and in that frozen heartbeat, the faint scent of lemon cleaner and lavender from Aaliyah's uniform became a tether, grounding the moment, marking it as different from anything else in the house. Emily's small hand reached for Aaliyah's, the connection simple, unadorned, but in that quiet grasp lay a weight that no designer gown, no polished smile, could match, and for the first time in the afternoon, a smile, small and genuine, crept across Emily's face, a recognition of the person who had always quietly cared for her, who had always seen her, even when the world and her father's expectation had pressed her into silence. Richard's eyes scanned Aaliyah, taking in the calm certainty, the gentle strength in the way she held herself, the quiet authority of someone who had cared for his daughter with consistency and grace, and for a fleeting moment, the model's whispers faded, the soft click of heels became background noise, and all that remained was the pause of recognition, the weight of a choice that had been made not for spectacle, not for status, but for the truth Emily's heart knew. Aaliyah's lips curved slightly in acknowledgement, her posture unwavering, as the room seemed to exhale together, the sunlight catching her dark skin in warm tones, and Emily squeezed her hand once more, a silent affirmation of her choice. And in that pause, Richard's expression softened, the coldness of authority giving way to the first flicker of understanding, a realization that the measure of worth was not found in appearances, but in the quiet constancy that had stood in the room unnoticed, yet entirely present. The grand hall settled into a tense quiet, the sunlight shifting across the polished marble floor as if the room itself was taking a deep breath. Emily Hawthorne, still holding Aaliyah Johnson's hand, felt a subtle warmth radiate from the gentle grasp, a reassurance that grounded her in the swirl of luxury and expectation around them. Richard Hawthorne remained in place, his tall figure framed by the towering windows, a momentary flicker of surprise softening the sharp angles of his face. And for the first time, he allowed himself to observe the space not as a commander, but as a man witnessing something unexpected unfold. The models, previously poised and confident, exchanged brief glances, their perfectly composed smiles now tinged with uncertainty, heels clicking lightly against the marble as they subtly shifted positions, the sound echoing in the vaulted room. Aaliyah stepped forward, her presence calm and measured, the subtle scent of lavender and clean linen trailing gently behind her, every movement deliberate yet effortless, a quiet authority that contrasted with the ornate surroundings. Emily's eyes followed her, noting the care in her posture, the way she had adjusted the tray moments before, small gestures that spoke volumes about her attentiveness and thoughtfulness, a consistency that had always been invisible to the world but never missed by the child who had relied upon her. Richard's gaze swept over the room again, scanning the finely arranged furniture, the gleam of sunlight on polished surfaces, and finally resting on Aaliyah, observing her silent confidence, the composed way she adjusted her uniform and met his eyes with steady clarity. He could sense the shift in energy, the subtle gravity that seemed to emanate from her presence, pulling attention not through words or extravagance, but through a quiet, undeniable competence. Emily's hand tightened ever so slightly around Aaliyah's, an almost imperceptible movement that conveyed trust and recognition, and in that brief connection, a wave of calm passed through the child, steadying her nerves against the weight of the situation. The room's air, once thick with expectation and quiet tension, seemed to soften, the sunlight catching Aaliyah's skin in gentle highlights, a warm contrast to the crisp suits and sparkling gowns surrounding them. Aaliyah lowered her eyes briefly, giving Emily a reassuring glance, a subtle nod that suggested patience and understanding, and Emily returned it with a small, confident smile that belied her years, a recognition that the decision she had made was not just for appearance, but for truth and connection. Richard took a slow step forward, the faint creak of his polished shoes on the marble floor punctuating the silence, his expression now a mixture of reflection and surprise, a quiet acknowledgement that the choice was meaningful beyond status or spectacle. The models, sensing the subtle power in the exchange, straightened their posture, some shifting slightly backward as if to give space, the air thick with the realization that the simple, measured presence of Aaliyah carried a weight that no elegance or polished exterior could compete with. Aaliyah's hand rested lightly on the back of a chair, a silent demonstration of her grounded composure, while her eyes, calm and observant, flicked briefly to Richard, silently conveying both respect and quiet confidence. Emily's attention remained fixed on her, a sense of reassurance and certainty building with each passing heartbeat, the soft echo of her own breath in the vast room marking a rhythm that contrasted with the previously tense cadence of expectation. As the moments stretched, the room seemed to collectively exhale, the sunlight shifting to highlight the subtle expressions of understanding, recognition, and respect beginning to form across faces that had moments ago been locked in anticipation, and in the gentle warmth of that quiet, steady presence, the grand hall felt less like a stage of performance and more like a space where genuine human connection quietly asserted itself, reshaping the energy of everyone present in a way that was as subtle as it was profound. The afternoon sunlight shifted slowly through the tall windows, brushing across the polished marble floors and reflecting off the crystal chandelier in a spectrum of soft colors that danced across the walls, catching the attention of everyone in the room, yet failing to disturb the quiet gravity that had settled over the space. Emily Hawthorne stood a little straighter, her hand still lightly clasping Aaliyah Johnson's, feeling the calm reassurance emanating from the maid whose presence had quietly commanded the attention of the room. Aaliyah adjusted the sleeve of her uniform, the subtle scent of lavender and lemon polish following her every movement, grounding the space in a familiar, gentle presence that contrasted with the polished elegance of the models lined up with perfect posture. Richard Hawthorne finally exhaled slowly, the sharp lines of his face softening just enough for a flicker of introspection to appear in his dark eyes, as he noticed for the first time the small, deliberate gestures Aaliyah had been making all along. How she had carefully offered a napkin when Emily spilled her drink last week, how she had quietly organized the little toys in the study, ensuring that Emily always had a sense of order and comfort in the midst of the imposing grandeur of the house. The models shifted slightly, heels tapping against the marble floor, whispers exchanged that carried just enough volume for the sharpest ears to catch, but none could mask the subtle unease growing in the room as the weight of Emily's choice became undeniable. Emily's eyes moved up to meet her father's gaze, finding in it a flicker of understanding, and in that instant, Aaliyah's calm presence seemed to radiate outward, filling the space with a quiet authority that made the model's perfectly controlled smiles falter ever so slightly. Richard's hand lifted to adjust the cuff of his jacket, a nervous tick unnoticed by all but Emily, who watched with a mixture of wonder and reassurance, realizing that the presence of someone who had consistently cared for her and seen her for who she truly was mattered far more than the curated elegance that surrounded her. Aaliyah stepped slightly closer to Emily, her posture relaxed but deliberate, the soft swish of her shoes against the floor echoing faintly, a subtle reminder that her role in Emily's life had always been quiet but unwavering. The room seemed to pause, the sunlight catching on the edges of the polished surfaces and reflecting in the eyes of those present, as if the space itself acknowledged the significance of the moment, the authority of a presence earned through consistency and care rather than spectacle or status. Emily squeezed Aaliyah's hand gently, a silent affirmation of her choice, her small smile a beacon of clarity amidst the tension, and Richard, taking another measured breath, felt a subtle shift in perception, a recognition that the qualities that truly mattered were those that had quietly shaped the child's world every day, unnoticed but never absent. The model's whispers faded to almost nothing, their confidence tempered by the undeniable truth of Emily's decision, while Aaliyah's calm demeanor and attentive eyes conveyed a quiet strength, a reminder that genuine care and understanding could hold more weight than the grandest of displays. The light in the room softened further as the sun lowered in the sky, casting long, warm streaks across the floor, illuminating the subtle expressions of reflection and realization on Richard's face, the delicate understanding in Emily's eyes, and the composed, grounded presence of Aaliyah standing tall beside the child, each moment layered with a quiet, cinematic clarity that spoke volumes about respect, recognition, and the unspoken bonds that had shaped this household long before any decision needed to be made. In that serene tension, the room held a collective breath, a shared acknowledgement that what mattered was not the glittering veneer of appearances but the enduring truth of care, consistency, and a presence that had quietly held space for a child's heart in a world filled with expectation, and the echoes of that understanding seemed to linger, warm and steady, in the sunlight streaming through the towering windows. The models straightened with quiet precision, their expressions flickering briefly between disbelief and polite restraint, heels tapping lightly against the marble floor, each small sound amplified in the hushed room, while Richard Hawthorne stood a step behind them, his posture rigid but his eyes revealing the first hints of introspection, dark brows knitting as he processed the quiet defiance and calm certainty radiating from Aaliyah Johnson. Aaliyah remained poised, hands gently resting at her sides, the faint sheen of sunlight glancing off her dark hair, the subtle warmth of her presence contrasting sharply with the polished luxury that surrounded them. Emily Hawthorne took a deep breath, her small chest rising and falling with deliberate rhythm, grounding herself in the steadiness of Aaliyah's quiet strength, feeling a sense of clarity that had eluded her earlier under the imposing expectations of her father and the line of models. The air seemed charged with subtle tension, a weight that was not oppressive but full of significance, as if the room itself acknowledged the choice being made, the silent authority of care and consistency standing in quiet opposition to opulence and cultivated appearances. Richard's eyes flicked between Aaliyah and Emily, noting the small gestures. The way Aaliyah had adjusted the hem of Emily's dress without a word, the gentle guidance of her hand along the edge of the marble table, the faint, almost imperceptible smile acknowledging Emily's decision, and he felt a subtle shift, a quiet unraveling of assumptions he had carried since his daughter's birth. The models exchanged soft glances, the polished precision of their smiles now tinged with an uncertainty they could not fully conceal, their eyes briefly tracking Emily's gaze, which remained unwavering on Aaliyah, and the connection between the two was palpable, a silent communication that required no words. The sunlight continued its slow journey across the room, catching the glint of crystal in the chandelier and throwing delicate light patterns onto the walls, illuminating the careful lines of Richard's face as he processed the realization that the child's choice was rooted in truth and genuine recognition, not spectacle or appearance. Aaliyah's steady gaze met Richard's for a moment, calm and assured, conveying competence and integrity without the need for assertion, and in that quiet exchange, a subtle tension resolved itself into understanding, the model's poised composure becoming a distant echo as the real weight of connection and care became undeniable. Emily's hand lightly squeezed Aaliyah's, reinforcing the bond and solidifying the quiet defiance of a choice that had been made not out of rebellion but out of recognition, understanding, and the truth of the child's heart. Richard took a measured step closer, the soft sound of his polished shoes echoing gently in the room, and in that motion, the authority he had relied upon all afternoon softened, yielding to the quiet moral clarity embodied by Aaliyah's presence and Emily's unwavering trust. The models subtly shifted again, their whispers fading entirely as the moment fully claimed the room, the polished luxury now serving merely as a backdrop to the human connection that held the room in suspended attention. Sunlight bathed the trio in warm tones as the shadows stretched long across the marble floor, emphasizing the layered complexity of recognition, trust, and quiet authority that had emerged in this brief, weighty pause, each heartbeat and breath resonating with significance, as if the very room had been transformed into a witness of understanding, subtle power, and the enduring influence of care over appearance. The quiet that had settled over the grand hall seemed to stretch indefinitely, each subtle shift of sunlight painting soft streaks across the marble floor and glinting in the crystal of the chandelier, highlighting the stillness that had taken hold. Emily Hawthorne's eyes remained locked on Aaliyah Johnson, the small hand resting lightly on the maid's, drawing reassurance from the steady, calm presence that had quietly anchored her throughout the afternoon. Aaliyah adjusted the edge of her uniform with a subtle, deliberate movement, the faint scent of lemon cleaner and lavender polishing the air around her, carrying a quiet authority that required no words yet spoke volumes to those attentive enough to notice. Richard Hawthorne's gaze moved across the room, tracing the line of models standing with perfect posture, their composed expressions now tinged with unease as they registered the significance of Emily's decision. For the first time, he allowed himself to observe the room not as a judge of appearances, but as a witness to the quiet, consistent care that Aaliyah had provided for his daughter, recognizing in the smallest gestures, the way she had subtly arranged Emily's belongings, the gentle attentiveness in her posture, the calm focus in her eyes, the true measure of responsibility and understanding. Emily's hand tightened slightly in response, a small, reassuring gesture that conveyed both trust and conviction, reinforcing the silent communication that had been building between her and Aaliyah throughout their shared experiences in the household. The models shifted slightly, heels tapping the polished floor, a muted rhythm of disbelief and surprise that contrasted with the steady calm of the maid and child at the center of the room. Richard's expression softened, the rigid lines of authority giving way to contemplation as he considered the quiet impact of Aaliyah's consistent presence, the small acts of care and attention that had always gone unnoticed but had formed the foundation of trust between her and Emily. Light reflected off the chandelier, scattering across the walls and ceiling, catching in the eyes of those present and illuminating the subtle expressions of recognition, realization, and quiet admiration forming on their faces. Aaliyah stepped forward just enough to adjust a loose strand of hair from Emily's face, her gesture gentle, precise, and attentive, and the room seemed to hold its breath, acknowledging the weight of unspoken understanding, the deep trust that had developed without fanfare, without grand statements, but through steady consistency. Emily's gaze remained fixed on her, the confidence in her choice growing with each passing heartbeat, a small smile curling at the corners of her lips as she felt the reassurance of being understood and supported by someone who had always been there. Richard's eyes lingered on the scene, the authority in his stance tempered by the recognition that the most meaningful influence over his daughter was not derived from power, wealth, or appearances, but from the patient, quiet guidance of someone who had consistently prioritized her well-being and understanding. The model's polished composure softened further, the room vibrating subtly with the tension of awareness, the subtle sound of shifting heels becoming background to the more profound rhythm of human connection at its core. Sunlight streamed fully into the space now, highlighting Aaliyah's steady posture, Emily's small but confident stance, and the reflective, thoughtful presence of Richard as he took in the quiet lesson unfolding before him. Each detail, the gentle touch, the soft glance, the composed smile, imparting a clear truth about care, understanding, and recognition that could not be measured in elegance, height, or wealth, but in quiet, steadfast presence and the impact of consistent, genuine attentiveness. The tension in the grand hall softened as sunlight shifted, illuminating the polished surfaces and casting warm streaks across the marble floors. Emily Hawthorne took a steadying breath, her gaze fixed on Aaliyah Johnson, feeling the quiet reassurance and presence that had guided her through moments of uncertainty and expectation. Aaliyah's posture remained calm and composed, her hands resting lightly at her sides, and her dark eyes scanned the room with a measured attentiveness, reflecting a patience and understanding that contrasted with the polished elegance of the models who still stood in silent observation, their heels barely making a sound on the smooth marble. Richard Hawthorne's eyes lingered on Aaliyah, noticing the subtle details of her movements, the precise way she adjusted the hem of Emily's dress earlier, the gentle tilt of her head, the confident yet unassuming calm that seemed to fill the space around her. He stepped forward slightly, the sound of his polished shoes on the floor echoing softly, and for a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath as if acknowledging the quiet authority that emanated from her presence. Emily's small hand tightened around Aaliyah's in a gesture of mutual understanding and trust, the child's confidence growing as she sensed the unspoken support and attentiveness of someone who had consistently been there for her. The models shifted again, their carefully maintained composure giving way to subtle signs of unease as they recognized the significance of the exchange unfolding before them. Light filtered through the tall windows, catching the glint of the chandelier and illuminating the fine lines of Richard's face, softening the sternness of his expression as he observed the care, consistency, and quiet authority in Aaliyah's demeanor, recognizing for the first time the impact of genuine attentiveness and understanding. Aaliyah stepped slightly closer to Emily, the faint scent of lavender polish accompanying her movement, and her eyes met Richard's briefly, calm yet resolute, conveying a strength that required no assertion but spoke clearly of her role in Emily's life. Emily mirrored the subtle reassurance, a small but confident smile crossing her face as she realized the depth of the bond she shared with Aaliyah, one built over countless unnoticed moments of care and quiet attention. The room remained still, each occupant attuned to the weight of the moment, the sunlight accentuating the gentle tension and highlighting the difference between superficial display and authentic presence. Richard took a deep, measured breath, his hands clasping and unclasping briefly, as he recognized the truth of what he was witnessing. The The qualities that truly mattered in guiding and nurturing his daughter were not derived from appearances or status, but from consistency, attentiveness, and a quiet, unwavering presence. The model's whispers diminished, their heels barely moving, as the clarity of Emily's choice and the quiet authority of Aaliyah settled firmly in the space, a subtle but undeniable force that reshaped the energy of the room. Sunlight continued its slow path, casting long, warm streaks across the floors and walls, illuminating the expressions of reflection, understanding, and recognition on the faces of those present. The moment held a weight that transcended the opulence of the surroundings, a layered, cinematic clarity revealing that care, attention, and authentic connection could command more influence and respect than any measure of elegance, beauty, or position, and the quiet, steady presence of Aaliyah Johnson stood as the undeniable center of that understanding, anchoring Emily Hawthorne in trust, affirmation, and the knowledge that her choice was grounded in truth and recognition. The room remained still, the quiet stretching like a gentle pause in the rhythm of time, sunlight now lower in the sky, casting long golden streaks across the marble floors and glinting off the chandelier crystals with a soft, warm glow that highlighted the subtle movements of each person present. Emily Hawthorne shifted slightly, her small hand still entwined with Aaliyah Johnson's, feeling the steady warmth and reassurance in the grasp, a reminder of the trust and bond that had guided her choice. Aaliyah's posture remained poised, every movement deliberate and graceful, the faint scent of lavender and freshly polished surfaces lingering around her, marking her presence without a word, yet commanding attention through quiet confidence and unwavering attentiveness. Richard Hawthorne exhaled slowly, his eyes scanning the room and finally resting on Aaliyah, noting the gentle precision in her gestures. The way she had subtly adjusted Emily's hair, the careful attentiveness in the tilt of her head, the soft focus in her dark eyes that spoke volumes of patience, understanding, and consistent care. The models, standing in a line with polished elegance, shifted subtly, their heels barely making a sound on the floor as they exchanged glances, the composure of their training tempered by the growing realization that the quiet presence before them carried more influence than their curated appearances. Emily's small smile grew, her chest rising and falling with calm certainty, feeling a quiet pride and affirmation in the choice she had made, grounded by the gentle support of Aaliyah's unspoken guidance. Richard's hands moved to clasp and unclasp lightly in front of him, a subtle sign of his inner contemplation, his dark eyes reflecting a mixture of surprise, admiration, and realization as he acknowledged the quiet authority and steady influence Aaliyah had maintained in his daughter's life. The air seemed to hold a collective breath, the faint hum of the chandelier and the distant sound of sunlight hitting the marble filling the room with a gentle rhythm, accentuating the significance of the moment without intrusion. Aaliyah stepped just enough to allow a small adjustment to Emily's posture, her movements fluid and deliberate, her calm presence radiating outward, a quiet assertion of guidance that did not demand attention, but could not be ignored. Emily responded with a slight squeeze of her hand, a silent acknowledgement of trust and mutual understanding, reinforcing the subtle communication that had developed over years of shared experience, a bond now clearly recognized in the room. Richard's gaze lingered, taking in the contrast between the quiet, consistent care exemplified by Aaliyah and the polished yet transient presence of the models, understanding in that moment the profound difference between appearances and authentic influence. The sunlight captured the fine details of expressions, the soft glimmer of awareness in Emily's eyes, the gentle steadiness in Aaliyah's posture, and the subtle shift in Richard's countenance as he allowed appreciation and respect to replace the rigid expectation he had carried moments before. The models' whispered exchanges faded, their polished composure giving way to the undeniable truth unfolding in the space, while the room itself seemed to breathe in rhythm with the quiet authority, genuine connection, and the unmistakable impact of presence that had long been overlooked. Each step, each subtle glance, each gentle motion spoke volumes, the long shadows and golden light emphasizing the layered, cinematic clarity of understanding, trust, and affirmation, capturing a moment in which the true measure of influence was not status, elegance, or power, but quiet, steady, and enduring presence, a lesson quietly observed and profoundly felt by everyone in the room. The golden sunlight shifted toward the horizon, spilling long beams across the polished marble floor, casting a warm glow that reflected softly in the crystal chandelier, creating tiny patterns that danced along the walls. Emily Hawthorne's small hand remained gently entwined with Aaliyah Johnson's, a silent anchor that steadied her amidst the lingering tension and expectation that still filled the expansive hall. Aaliyah's posture was calm and unshakable, the subtle scent of lavender and clean linen trailing behind her, a quiet reassurance that seemed to fill the space with a gentle gravity, drawing attention not through words but through presence alone. Richard Hawthorne stood slightly apart, his dark eyes observing the subtle gestures, the tilt of Aaliyah's head as she adjusted a tray, the faint glimmer of recognition in her gaze toward Emily, the careful composure that communicated patience and consistency without a single spoken word. The line of models shifted almost imperceptibly, heels clicking softly against the marble, their perfectly controlled expressions now tinged with unease, as they registered the quiet authority and calm attention that Aaliyah embodied. Emily's eyes reflected a mixture of admiration and relief, the small curve of her lips forming a smile that spoke of recognition and trust, a silent affirmation that she had chosen someone who understood her beyond appearances and performance. Richard exhaled slowly, his posture easing slightly, the tightness in his shoulders loosening as he absorbed the significance of the scene before him, noticing how the small but deliberate actions of Aaliyah carried more influence than the elegance and polish that the models displayed. Sunlight caught in the fine details, the glint of crystal, the reflection on the marble floor, the shimmer in Aaliyah's dark hair, illuminating the space with a soft, almost reverent glow that highlighted the unfolding dynamic, emphasizing the quiet power of care and attentiveness. Emily's hand tightened ever so slightly on Aaliyah's, the small gesture reverberating with significance, a bond strengthened by the recognition of consistent guidance and understanding. Aaliyah's eyes met Richard's for a brief moment, calm and confident, conveying strength and reliability without a word, and in that glance, the subtle weight of influence was unmistakable, unspoken yet clearly felt across the room. The models exchanged subtle glances among themselves, realizing that the gravity of the moment lay not in appearances or polished grace, but in the quiet, steadfast presence that had consistently guided Emily, a presence that could not be measured in style or status, but only in attention, trust, and understanding. The room seemed to hold a collective breath, the faint echo of movement against the marble floor barely audible, as the sunlight continued to cast long, warm streaks, illuminating the contours of the figures and the subtle shifts in expressions, revealing reflection, recognition, and quiet admiration forming across the faces of all present. Aaliyah shifted slightly to offer Emily a reassuring glance, her movements smooth and deliberate, the calm steadiness of her presence filling the hall with a quiet, undeniable authority. Emily returned the gesture with a subtle nod, her trust and confidence mirrored in the small squeeze of her hand, reinforcing the quiet communication that had developed over time between them. Richard's eyes lingered, taking in the contrast between the serene, attentive presence of Aaliyah and the poised yet impermanent stance of the models, a realization dawning that genuine influence and understanding could not be bought or displayed, but earned through consistency, care, and unwavering attention. The soft interplay of light and shadow emphasized the significance of this recognition, the long stretches of sun across the floor highlighting the depth and subtlety of human connection, the impact of thoughtful presence, and the profound difference between superficial polish and authentic understanding, as the quiet authority of Aaliyah Johnson anchored the room, drawing Emily Hawthorne into a space of trust, affirmation, and clarity amidst the lingering echoes of expectation and poised observation. Richard Hawthorne's eyes lingered on Aaliyah Johnson, the subtle warmth of the sunlight casting a soft glow across her dark hair and calm, steady expression, revealing in its quiet detail the depth of care and attention that had guided Emily Hawthorne through countless small but meaningful moments. Emily stood beside her, shoulders straightening as confidence grew, the gentle clasp of Aaliyah's hand reinforcing a sense of reassurance and trust that seemed to fill the expansive hall with a calm energy, a quiet authority that contrasted with the polished elegance of the models lined along the wall. The models shifted slightly, their whispered glances and the faint tap of heels on marble underscoring the tension in the room, a subtle recognition of the influence wielded not by appearance or status, but by steadfast attentiveness and genuine understanding. Richard's posture softened as he took a careful step forward, the sound of his shoes barely audible against the smooth marble, his gaze taking in every nuanced movement, the slight adjustment of Aaliyah's uniform, the way she held herself with composed confidence, the gentle, measured glances she directed toward Emily, communicating reassurance and patience without a single word. Emily's eyes mirrored the warmth of that presence, a small, determined smile forming as she absorbed the depth of care and consistency that had always guided her, the quiet power of someone who saw her truly and consistently. The sunlight continued to pour in, illuminating the subtle expressions on Richard's face, the flicker of realization in his dark eyes, the softened lines of his jaw as he registered the impact of consistent attention and trust, the profound influence of actions carried out with quiet integrity. The model's composure faltered imperceptibly, their careful poise and polished elegance overshadowed by the understated authority of Aaliyah's presence, each subtle movement and gentle glance reinforcing the undeniable trust and connection she had nurtured. Emily's small hand pressed lightly against Aaliyah's, the touch a silent affirmation of confidence and certainty, reinforcing the bond and trust built over years of steady presence and unwavering care. Richard observed the contrast, the quiet interactions layered with meaning, the subtle gestures that communicated understanding, respect, and attentive guidance, realizing that the measure of influence and authority in the room had shifted from appearance and social status to the quiet, steady presence of someone who consistently nurtured and cared with intention. The room itself seemed to settle in recognition, the sunlight catching the crystal chandelier, scattering small flecks of light across the walls, highlighting the expressions of thought, reflection, and emerging understanding on the faces of all present. Aaliyah moved slightly to adjust a small detail, a chair slightly askew, a folded napkin on the side table, her actions deliberate and calm, reinforcing the quiet steadiness and measured authority that permeated the hall. Emily's gaze followed her, the subtle, confident movements of Aaliyah reinforcing a sense of safety and certainty that resonated within her, a clear affirmation of her choice. Richard's eyes softened further, acknowledging the impact of attention, consistency, and care over the trappings of status and appearance, the quiet authority of Aaliyah Johnson anchoring the space with clarity and purpose. The models, sensing the subtle shift in weight and influence, adjusted their stance, the polished floor capturing the gentle sound of shifting heels as the room collectively absorbed the significance of this unspoken lesson, that genuine understanding, steadfast presence, and thoughtful care could command respect and shape choices far beyond what elegance, style, or rank alone could achieve. Sunlight stretched long across the floors, highlighting the contours of the room, the expressions of each person, and the layered significance of the bonds being affirmed in the quiet, steady presence that filled the hall with a profound sense of recognition, trust, and calm authority. The quiet in the grand hall deepened, the sunlight now dipping lower, scattering golden reflections across the marble floor and crystal chandelier, making the space feel almost suspended in time. Emily Hawthorne's small hand remained lightly entwined with Aaliyah Johnson's, the warmth and steady reassurance from the gentle grasp radiating a calm certainty that contrasted with the lingering tension in the room. Aaliyah's posture remained composed and deliberate, every movement precise, yet effortless, the faint scent of lavender polish and lemon cleaner blending with the warm air, a subtle reminder of the consistent care she had provided for Emily over the years. Richard Hawthorne's gaze lingered on Aaliyah, absorbing the quiet authority in her calm presence, the subtle attentiveness in her gestures, the steady focus in her eyes, and the quiet confidence that required no assertion yet commanded full recognition. The models, previously polished and composed, exchanged fleeting glances, their heels tapping softly against the marble floor, whispers barely audible as they registered the undeniable influence radiating from the maid who had consistently nurtured Emily. Emily's eyes shone with quiet pride and assurance, the faintest curve of a smile playing across her lips as she felt the affirmation of her choice, understanding that the person she trusted most was present not in grandeur or display, but in steadfast guidance and consistent attention. Richard exhaled slowly, noticing how the subtle movements, the tilt of Aaliyah's head, the careful adjustment of Emily's sleeve, the small, precise interactions, spoke more to the child's confidence and well-being than any of the model's polished appearances. The sunlight highlighted these small details, glinting softly in Aaliyah's hair and eyes, illuminating the faint expressions of thought, realization, and quiet respect on Richard's face. The room's energy seemed to shift as each observer registered the significance of consistent care and genuine presence, the subtle, unspoken influence that had guided Emily toward her decision becoming palpably clear. Aaliyah took a gentle step forward, repositioning a chair slightly with quiet precision, her calm and deliberate movements reinforcing the presence and trust she had cultivated in Emily, who mirrored the motion with a small nod and a soft squeeze of the hand. Richard watched, the faint lines of surprise softening into recognition as he acknowledged the depth of Aaliyah's quiet authority, the cumulative impact of patience, attentiveness, and care that had shaped Emily's trust and confidence. The models adjusted subtly, their polished expressions now tinged with reflection, the rhythmic tap of heels fading as the quiet truth of influence replaced the reliance on appearance or status. Emily's confidence solidified, the reassurance in Aaliyah's presence grounding her fully in the moment, her small smile deepening as she absorbed the clarity and affirmation of her choice. Richard's eyes continued to track the nuanced gestures and small, deliberate motions, the calm determination in Aaliyah's movements emphasizing that authority was not claimed through display, but through consistent, thoughtful action. The light continued to stream through the windows, highlighting the interplay of shadows and warmth, illuminating the faces of all present. With clarity and subtle reverence, capturing the moment's layered complexity of recognition, trust, and the quiet power of steadfast, caring presence. Every subtle gesture, glance, and measured movement reinforced the weight of unspoken authority and the profound impact of consistent attentiveness, making the grand hall feel less like a place of display and more like a space defined by the genuine connections and understanding between those who truly cared. Richard Hawthorne stepped back slightly, the polished marble beneath his feet reflecting the warm afternoon sunlight that streamed through the tall windows, highlighting the subtle contours of his face as he processed the depth of what he had just witnessed. His mind moved through layers of reflection, replaying the small, deliberate gestures of Aaliyah Johnson, the gentle adjustments of Emily Hawthorne's dress, the patient tilt of her head, the calm, steady presence that had guided Emily with unwavering attention for years, and he felt a quiet shift inside himself, a softening of the rigid assumptions that had governed his perception of authority and influence. The models remained poised, their heels tapping lightly against the marble floor, their whispers subdued, but even in their careful observation, they could sense the gravity of the room changing. The subtle realization that the quiet consistency of Aaliyah's care carried more weight than any polished appearance or curated posture. Emily's hand remained lightly clasped in Aaliyah's, the warmth and steadiness of the contact reinforcing her confidence and trust, a reassurance that she had made a choice rooted in understanding and genuine recognition rather than spectacle or expectation. The sunlight caught the glint in Aaliyah's dark eyes, the soft sheen of her hair, and the precise, calm movements she continued to make, adjusting a chair, straightening a decorative napkin, the smallest motions conveying a presence that was simultaneously gentle and authoritative. Richard's chest rose and fell with measured breaths as he observed, the tightness in his shoulders easing, his expression reflecting contemplation, recognition, and a growing respect for the steady influence that had shaped his daughter's understanding of care, trust, and guidance. The model's expressions subtly shifted, the carefully maintained composure now tinged with awareness and quiet reflection, as they understood that authority and influence could be demonstrated not through grandeur or social stature, but through attentive, consistent, and thoughtful presence. Emily's gaze followed Aaliyah, absorbing the quiet confidence and subtle guidance, her own shoulders straightening with the affirmation that she had chosen someone who had always seen and understood her. Richard's eyes softened further, taking in the contrast between the steadfast, calm presence of Aaliyah and the poised but transient display of the models, recognizing for the first time the profound impact of consistent, quiet guidance over appearance or status. Light continued to flow through the windows, casting long shadows and warm highlights across the room, illuminating the expressions of understanding, thought, and emerging appreciation on all faces, and the soft click of heels against the marble became a background rhythm to the deeper, unspoken acknowledgement of care, trust, and subtle authority that had reshaped the atmosphere. Aaliyah's small, deliberate gestures, the careful placement of a decorative element, the attentive glance toward Emily, the calm way she adjusted her posture, communicated a silent authority that resonated throughout the hall, anchoring the energy of the room in steady, measured presence. Emily's eyes mirrored that quiet strength, her subtle smile reflecting clarity and assurance, the bond between them now evident to all who observed, reinforcing that the truest measure of influence and respect was rooted not in status, power, or elegance, but in care, attentiveness, and a steady, unwavering presence that guided with quiet confidence. The sunlight now shifted, casting elongated beams across the floor, highlighting the subtle interplay of expressions, gestures, and the serene authority that had emerged, and the room seemed to hold itself in a suspended moment of recognition, reflection, and deep understanding of the values that mattered most. The golden light of late afternoon stretched across the grand hall, casting elongated shadows and reflecting off the polished marble floor in warm, soft streaks that highlighted the quiet transformation in the space. Emily Hawthorne stood closer to Aaliyah Johnson, her small hand firmly resting in the maid's, the sense of trust and affirmation radiating from that connection grounding her in a calm confidence she had not fully felt before. Aaliyah's posture remained composed, movements deliberate and gentle, the faint scent of lavender and lemon polish lingering as a subtle marker of her presence, quiet but undeniably influential, a demonstration of steady authority without a single word spoken. Richard Hawthorne stepped forward, the polished leather of his shoes softly echoing on the marble, his eyes lingering on the small gestures and deliberate actions of Aaliyah, the tilt of her head, the careful adjustment of Emily's dress, the attentive glances that conveyed both care and understanding. And he felt a subtle shift within himself, a recognition that the quiet consistency and attentiveness she had displayed for years carried far more weight than any superficial display or status. The models, standing in a line along the wall, shifted with faint uncertainty, the delicate click of heels a soft accompaniment to the subtle transformation of the room's energy, their polished smiles now tinged with awareness of the genuine authority that was not derived from appearance, but from presence and attentive care. Emily's gaze met Aaliyah's, a quiet affirmation reflected in the steady, confident expression of the maid, and she felt a warmth of reassurance, a confirmation that her choice had been guided by understanding, trust, and recognition of someone who had consistently been there for her. Richard's hands, previously clasped tensely, relaxed slightly, his dark eyes softening as he considered the quiet but undeniable influence that Aaliyah had wielded through small, deliberate actions over time, shaping Emily's confidence and sense of security in ways that had gone unnoticed by most, yet were unmistakable to anyone attuned to the nuances of care and attentiveness. The sunlight caught the edges of Aaliyah's hair and the soft glint of her eyes, illuminating the calm certainty of her presence and reinforcing the weight of her quiet authority, while Emily mirrored that calm in the small but confident lift of her shoulders, her hands squeezing slightly in acknowledgement and trust. The model's composed postures shifted imperceptibly, whispers fading to silence as the room absorbed the significance of the moment, the gentle rhythm of the space reflecting the shift from superficial display to authentic influence and understanding. Aaliyah's slight, deliberate movements, the adjustment of a chair, the repositioning of a decorative element, the attentive glance toward Emily, communicated a calm, steady authority that resonated throughout the room, reinforcing the depth of trust and the affirmation of Emily's decision. Richard exhaled, the subtle loosening of his jaw and the softening of his brow reflecting an internal acknowledgement that authority and respect could be commanded not by appearance, status, or elegance alone, but through consistent, attentive, and meaningful presence. The light continued to stretch across the hall, highlighting the layered expressions of reflection, recognition, and quiet appreciation on each face, capturing the nuanced understanding that had emerged. The truest measure of influence was grounded in care, consistency, and unwavering attention, and Aaliyah Johnson stood at the center of that realization, her calm presence anchoring Emily Hawthorne in clarity, trust, and a profound affirmation of the bond they shared, a silent testament to the enduring impact of genuine human connection. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the towering windows, casting a warm, golden hue across the polished marble floors, illuminating the subtle reflections in the crystal chandelier and scattering tiny prisms of light across the grand hall. Emily Hawthorne's hand remained gently clasped in Aaliyah Johnson's, the small warmth and steady reassurance anchoring her in the moment, a silent affirmation of the trust and understanding that had grown between them over the years. Aaliyah stood poised, every movement deliberate and measured, the faint scent of lavender polish and lemon cleaner trailing softly behind her, a quiet testament to the consistent care she had provided for Emily, a presence that had quietly shaped the child's sense of security and confidence without fanfare or recognition. Richard Hawthorne's gaze lingered on Aaliyah, absorbing the understated authority in her calm demeanor, the precise adjustments of Emily's dress, the attentive glances, the subtle way she carried herself with confidence and grace. And he felt a shift within himself, a quiet acknowledgement that influence and respect were earned through steady, thoughtful presence rather than appearance or status alone. The models, lined along the wall, shifted with faint unease, heels clicking softly on the marble floor, their polished composure now tinged with subtle recognition of the genuine authority Aaliyah embodied. Emily's small smile deepened, a soft confidence reflected in her eyes, the connection with Aaliyah reinforcing the certainty of her choice and the quiet power of consistent, caring attention. The sunlight highlighted the contours of the room, catching the subtle expressions on Richard's face, the softening of his brow, the slight lift of his gaze, the quiet reflection forming as he considered the significance of what he had witnessed, and each small movement of Aaliyah, the gentle adjustment of a chair or the calm glance toward Emily, further reinforced her undeniable presence. Emily's hand squeezed lightly, a gesture of mutual acknowledgement and trust, and the warmth of that simple action seemed to spread through the room, imbuing the space with a gentle, steady energy. Richard exhaled slowly, the stiffness in his shoulders easing, his expression showing a layered recognition of the impact of consistent attentiveness, patience, and genuine care on shaping Emily's confidence and understanding. The model's polished, postures softened imperceptibly, whispers fading as the subtle authority and calm influence of Aaliyah claimed the attention of the room, demonstrating a power that was not flaunted but earned and deeply felt. The sunlight stretched longer across the floor, casting warm highlights and shadows that danced with the movements and expressions of those present, emphasizing the layered, cinematic clarity of the moment and the quiet affirmation of trust, connection, and recognition. Every subtle gesture, glance, and measured motion spoke volumes. The tilting of Aaliyah's head, the soft focus of her eyes, the calm, precise movements that carried decades of experience in caring for a child, and the room seemed suspended, held in the quiet resonance of understanding and genuine human connection. Emily's eyes mirrored the strength and steadiness she had learned to trust, a final, confident smile curling across her lips as she recognized that her choice had been guided by truth, attention, and the enduring presence of someone who had always seen and understood her. Richard, observing the intricate interplay of gestures, expressions, and light, finally allowed himself a small, reflective nod, a recognition that authority, respect, and influence could be commanded through patience, care, and quiet consistency, and the grand hall, bathed in warm sunlight and gentle shadows, held a collective acknowledgement of the enduring power of steady, thoughtful presence. leaving a lasting impression that transcended the fleeting allure of appearances and status.